This program is made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Maryland Humanities Council.
Hello and welcome to The Writing Life. My name is Terence Winch, and it's my pleasure today to introduce our guest writer, Ciaran Carson. Ciaran is one of Ireland's most accomplished and eclectic artists. He's a noted poet, a memoirist, novelist, translator, and last but not least, a traditional Irish flute player. A native of Belfast in the north of Ireland, Ciaran does not often visit these shores, so it's a rare treat to welcome you here today.
Very happy to be here. Thanks.
I mentioned that you're a musician, Ciaran, and that's pretty much of a rarity among the writers who have come over here in recent years for this program. And I'd like to start our conversation today with what would be, if I had to name my favorite book of yours, my favorite book, which is Last Night's Fun, a book about traditional Irish music, although I think it had a different subtitle.
It's about food and music and time, I think, as well as other things. And I think that's, if you don't mind my saying so, the fact that it's about food as well as the music, you know.
That's right, yeah.
And it's about time. I think the aim of the book was to show that playing tunes isn't a thing which occurs in a vacuum, that it occurs in a context of eating and drinking and smoking and having a good time by and large, and conversation, you know.
If it's traditional Irish music.
Yeah,
right,
indeed.
Right.
So it was an attempt to show that that the art form or the genre of the Irish music involves a whole sort of web of conversation and how you interact with society, you know.
Yeah.
And that art is not stuck out here as a separate thing, that it's an integral part of your life, and that it can be played at any time, anywhere, any place. You can play it in a ditch, you can play it on a bus, you can play it on the train, you can play it in a back room, you can play it standing on your head, you know, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
You know?
What kind of influence has the music had in your writing and in other ways other than the subject matter?
Yeah, in my writing, I mean, when I write a sentence, or if I write a poem, I'm always conscious of having to have some sort of a structure in the sentence or a structure in the line, that it has to conform to a pattern of sound. It has to go tick, 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 or ticky, 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 or whatever it might be. And at times I write, when I'm writing, the sound or the structure of a reel would be at the back of my mind as a structure, a construct, something to hold on to while the sentence unfolds itself in time. So in that sense, how I write is certainly at the back of my mind. It's concerned with how it sounds, and it's concerned with the impact of the words in a rhythmical structure thing. You know?
Do you play every day?
What I tend to do is that at the moment I'm halfway into a novel. And I would write a few sentences, then I scratch my head and stare at the wall for about half an hour or so, you know, half an hour to think. And I have this at my side, and I go, and I write something, you know. And it's not that the thing I write is involved with that tune, but that the tunes are around me all the time, you know, and that my hands go automatically to a pattern, you know, and the pattern somehow then is in your head, you know. And it's an odd thing, you know, that you've got a huge sort of backland, a kind of a hinterland of noise at the back of your mind all the time, you know, out of which, you know, stuff evolves and escapes into the language, as it were.
Along with music, another central force in your life seems to be the Irish language. You grew up bilingual in both Irish and English, and I wanted you to maybe explain how that came to be and what effect Irish has in your writing.
Right. Where I come from, I was reared on the Falls Road in Belfast. My parents learned Irish as a second language, as a cause that if they learned Irish, they would have access to Ireland, as it were, and the idea of Ireland.
Were they both Belfast natives as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my father especially learned Irish very, very, very well, and he speaks it like as if it were his language, as if it were his first language. So they spoke Irish at home. If you spoke English in the house, it was a sin.
Really?
It was, it was a sin. It was, My father was a Catholic, and I spoke Irish, and if you spoke English in the house, it was just bad. It was evil, So you learn to speak English outside, on the street. So the language of the home was Irish, and the language of the outside world was you spoke English. So I guess I learned English at the age of 3, 4, or something like that, But I remember being aware at that age, even I think, that saying a thing in Irish and saying it in English were not the same things. That because it's another language, it's not the same idea of the world. And then, out of that, the fact that English is the language in which I write, I'm always aware that behind it, it could be said in another language. It could be something else. That is not a final thing. It's not a finalized idea of what the world is. So that the curious thing was that I emerged out of that experience as being skeptical of language and faith and religion and the world in general, you know. And my father's idea was that if you learned Irish and if you were a Catholic, that was it, and that's what you were, you know. But as I said, I came out of it being very skeptical about how you say things, how you put things, how you assess things, how you arrive at a state of affairs, which is a final idea of the world, you know. So in the context of Northern Ireland, it's an interesting sort of spin on the authority of the state and the authority of the powers that be that say you must do this or you must conform or you must act in this manner, because the world of language is only one world, you know, and the world of the music is another world. The world of Irish is one world. The world of English or Latin or French or Chinese or whatever it might be. So that all that one can do in that context is to articulate oneself as well as one can, with the understanding that it's only a way of saying things. You know? It's a game, or it's a means towards an end of fun, I hope, or communication, or look, this is good, why don't we do this instead of that, you know? So the idea of a state in Northern Ireland where for a long time that state held that you could only be a good member of that state if you conform to being certain things, you know, is a bad idea. And I think slowly over the past 5 years, 6 years, we have evolved. We've arrived at a state where it depends, where things are starting to change, or starting to move towards a situation where the state that is Northern Ireland can be more open-ended. That it depends on who you are. It depends if you talk about it. Let's see what happens, you know.
Do you ever write in Irish?
I have done, and sometimes I feel I should do it, you know, a bit more. I feel that if I were to do it, I would have to go into the language again. I would have to learn it almost, you know, because it was for a long time, the Irish I had, it was the language of home. It wasn't the kind of language that handled all that stuff about the outside world and the abstract ideas and the ideologies, you know, or science or whatever, you know.
You did promise me, though, you'd do something in Irish today, maybe a song. We talked about that earlier.
Oh, I know.
Is that still a possibility?
It's very early in the day for that sort of thing, but I'll have a stab at it.
What are you going to do?
This is, let me see. It's a song which is written by a poet called Raftery, who you've heard of maybe, you know.
Sure.
He lived in the 18th century, and he walked the roads, and he composed songs, and this is, as an awful lot of his songs were, a song of love, sung by a man who's in love with a girl and she's not in love with him, which is often the way it goes in Ireland. I don't know. And I won't do the whole song. It's a very long song, so I'll just sing for the idea of how it might sound.
Yes.
Moghal Khan Nafring Latilan Nardri Vin Lot Boschach Stardigi Kasan your Warahifil Tartin Isich Miloi Frachang Ralamri Lord Shilam Segamuchimullah Starere Kallaf Shidragashi Tuchirafteri Bihugolds Kedefwalche Tanshler Lodger Tapmwalili.
Beautiful.
That's one verse.
Terrific. Beautiful. That's really nice. Great singing voice you have. Well, we better, I guess, get off music for a few minutes, so they'll have to change the name of the program. So.
I'll read some poems.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you about that. You, I think earlier in your career, you were, I think, known best for being a poet and had published quite a lot of poetry. And I've been sort of trying to figure out the sort of arc of your most recent writing history, because it seems like with the publication of Last Night's Fun in 1996, you entered into a whole new groove,
prose,
a whole new. You went into prose, but you've been publishing at a really unbelievable rate. After Last Night's Fun, we had The Star Factory, Fishing for Amber, Shamrock Tea, a new translation of Dante's Inferno, which isn't prose, but. And I know that you left your job with the Northern Ireland Arts Council somewhere around that time, 1998 or so. Yeah. Was that part of the explanation for this incredible productivity?
Well, yeah, if you got time to do it, I mean, it helps, you know. Yeah. Although at the time I was in the Arts Council, I mean, and I still got I did a certain amount of it, you know. It was also the idea of, you know, prose to me was an interesting concept, you know. And Last A Night's Fun was a book I thought I wouldn't ever write.
You didn't think you'd write it?
I didn't think I would write this book, but it happened that there was this guy, and he said to me, I read some of the stuff that you've done in prose, you know, which I hadn't done at that stage an awful lot. And he says, you could write this book about Irish music. But what is I said, I can't write prose, you know, I'm a poet, you know, I don't write that sort of stuff. And he just kept at me and at me, you know, and he says, look, I can do you a deal, I can give you an advance on a book of X amount of pounds. And I thought, well, all right, you know, I mean, you know, and I was just done as in that manner, and I didn't have any hopes for it really, like, you know, but once I got involved in it, in the idea of prose, to write a book about the smell of things, the taste of things, the atmosphere of things, you know, as I say, the fact that when you engaged in playing the stuff, in the music, if you're involved in the music, you're also involved in a whole sort of mindset. You're involved in a structure of the universe, which involves crack, as they call it in Ireland, you know. And that's the experience of being there, you know, and being drunk or half drunk or getting up in the morning with a hangover and eating a big fry, you know, and so on, you know. But I wanted to do that with style, you know, and to write the prose almost as well as you would write, you know, a line of a verse, you know, to have the, you know, structure. I mean, it starts off, I think, and I wanted to, at the start, with a sort of some kind of a slant to it. We are in Ballyweird on the outskirts of Portrush, County Antrim, and it's the morning after the night before. Or rather, it is sometime afternoon, and we've just staggered back from the local spar, laden with the makings of a fry. Bacon, sausages, black pudding, white pudding, potato bread, or as we call it, fudge, and the yellow cornmeal soda farls peculiar to the northwest region. It's all sizzling in the pan. The almost visible aroma wafts through the house. Soon everything will be arrayed on mismatched plates. We will contemplate it briefly before eating it. The wavy bacon and the frilly crisp flipped over eggs, the puckered burst seams of the sausages, the milk tooth bits of fat and the black pudding. It all glistens under a glaze of melted lard, ornamented by the fudge and soda cut in neat triangles. Tendrils of steam rise from the 6 odd cups. No words are spoken as we ruminate and gulp. Then plates are pushed away, cigarettes lit. I'll say, I just want to have that.
No, it's a brilliant opening.
And there's wee things like neat triangles, tendrils of steam, and you get the tick, tick, tick.
Right.
And just wanted to evoke that thing and put it through the sound of the words, really, or something like that.
And so that was the book that really opened the door to the whole idea of writing more prose.
Yeah. And so as a result of that book, I got interested in the idea of style and prose and how to write prose. I mean, it's been said that the kind of stuff I write in prose is a bit ornate. It's a bit butch at times. You know? It's a bit over the top. Yeah. And I can't help it.
Well, I mean, I think what you've done in Fishing for Amber and Shamrock Tea is very analogous to what goes on in Last Night's Fun, in that they're very unique, very, very idiosyncratic books that I don't think anyone else could write, really. I mean, they're constructed according to your own very specific aesthetics that do seem to me to be related to music and the way you connect everything up. It's like the medley of tunes, you know. But you have written many books of poetry. You've won all kinds of awards, T.S. Eliot Prize and the Irish Times Aer Lingus Award. And I thought maybe we could get you to read a few poems. We talked about today's a snowy day here in Maryland, and
this is a poem which is a translation from the poetry of a Romanian poet, actually. It's not me at all. I wrote this poem. So it's an interesting spin of thing. It's a poet called Stefan August Duanas. Romanian is not one of the languages which I speak too well, I can assure you. But, I mean, I've got the language on one page, I've got the original on one page, and the English of a sort on the other page. And on the language Romanian, that's a bit like Latin. It's not like Latin at all, but, I mean, you've got an idea about how it goes. Anyway, so this is a poem called The Poet as a Snow Merchant. When spring has sprung and disappeared the snow, and youngsters want to laugh at grown-ups, but find instead of snowdrifts, brothers, parents, ready-made folk, then the clown appears, this crazy who sells snow. Hibernian winter permafrosts his soul. He haggles like a lunatic with naked trees, his frozen birds and ice floes creaking like somnivolent Antarctica. He speaks of seeds as unexploded atom bombs. Swans drift by in caravanserai across the colour-coded blue ice of one eye. You could catch a pike in the pupil black bullet hole drilled in the other. He hawks his merchandise remorselessly, and being snow himself, he spreads himself about. A scattered aftermath of downy pillow feathers marks the progress of his unseen army, in which all the jolly fellows carry brooms instead of ostrich plumes. The mayor's statue they denounce as being hollow. The fact that the poem was written in the 60s, I think, in Romania, seems to imply, well, I think that the poem is not only about snow.
Yeah.
It's about other issues, I think, you know. Yeah. And it's about issues of power and who's in charge and who's the poet anyway, you know, to speak, and is he a clown, is he crazy? And so it's, I guess it is a poem about the role of the poet in society, where the society is a state which observes you and watches how you move, you know. So there are some parallels possibly with the state of Northern Ireland.
And some of those same issues come into play in your latest book, which is a translation of Dante's Inferno, which is getting a lot of incredibly great reviews and attention. And I thought maybe you might want to say something about just how you came to write this or translate the poem and the process was.
The process was that I was approached by a person who also approached the poets Michael Longley. I forget who else was involved in this whole scheme. But each one of us was asked to do a bit of Dante into English. And at this stage, I confess, I didn't know anything about Dante's poetry beyond the fact that there's something about of hell or inferno and that there's something, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Right. That was all I knew about Dante, you know. And I said, well, I'll see what it's like. And I had a look, and I went to the library, and I got a Dante translations and Dante this and that, and I looked at it, and it was impenetrable. Yeah. I couldn't make head nor tail of it, you know. And I looked at it, and I looked, and I said, when I handed it, and I said, no, I can't do this. And then I was annoyed with myself, you know, and I had another stab at it. And I remember, I decided, right, the La Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy of Dante, is written what they call terza rima, which means it's an interlocking rhyme, which has to rhyme not only once and twice, but 3 times. It goes, don't rhyme, rhyme, rhyme. And then the rhyme in between has to interlock with that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, all down the page. And it's complex, and it's a complicated scheme. If you translate that, one way of translating is not to have the rhymes in it at all. Another, way of doing it is to have half rhymes or whatever. But I mean, I thought that the small understanding of Italian I had at that stage was that the sound of the rhymes and the sound of the ongoing verse was a part of the effect. And I wanted that effect if I was going to do it, you know. So I said, I have to be done. Terza rima. Has to have the rhymes. It took me a week to do 6 lines. Because I just couldn't. I couldn't get my head round it, you know. It was tough. I said, and at that stage, I said, I'm not going to do it. I despaired of it, really. But then again, I came back at it, and I finally got a canto done. And it kind of worked out all right. And I enjoyed doing it. And it struck me that the more that I learned about Dante and what the poem was about and what the state of affairs was in Italy at the time it was written, and his status in society and what he was and what he did and what he didn't do, the more it struck me that it was about issues of control and law and language and power and authority, issues which are not that far away from my own home, you know, place. The poem was written in not in Italian, because at that time there was no such thing really as the Italian language. There was the dialect of Florence, there was the dialect of Rome, there was the dialect of Arezzo, wherever, you know. There was no such thing as a standardized mode of the Italian language. If you wrote a big epic poem at the time, you wrote it in Latin. Dante decided to write this poem in his own language, his own home. It was the language of the household, no, it wasn't. That's not exact. It was the language of the state in which he lived, which was one town. It was the language of Firenze, Florence. Dante, it's a long story, but Dante was expelled from Florence because he was accused of accepting bribes. You know, he was a high man in the society. He was expelled. I said to Dante, if you ever come back, you'll be, hung, and that's there, whatever. So he went on the road, and he walked from town to town for all the rest of his life in Italy, and on the hoof, he wrote the poem.
Yeah.
So the poem, it describes a descent into hell, and what he sees in hell, and what's going on in hell, and who he meets down in hell, and he meets the people that he meets down in hell. There are guys he knew up here, up above, and he says, there's you, I know why you're here, so forth. He even meets people who are still alive up above, and he's got them down in hell.
The power of poetry.
He hits them so much.
Ciaran, unfortunately, we're only scratching the surface here, but we're running out of time. And I wish we had time to talk about Shamrock Tea and Fishing for Amber and some of your other works, but we do have to finish out. And we started off with music and a song, and I thought maybe we could finish out with your playing a tune on the tin whistle.
Yeah, right. This is a jig called. I can't remember the name of it. It's called ABC.
Yeah.
Join the Howard County Poetry and Literature Society for a celebration of distinguished writers. Joko Palizzo brings nationally and internationally recognized authors to both stage and screen. The Writing Life features a personal look at these writers and their craft. For more information on this prize-winning nonprofit organization, call 410-730-7524 or visit our website.